Hello, good morning. Today we are going to discuss a few clinical charts. Last time we have discussed about Parkinson's, cerebral cortex, and myopia. Today we are going to discuss about retina, layers of retina, and hypermetropia, and pathway of hearing. This is the chart we are going to give for the exam, and this you will see the image is found behind the retina. In case of myopia, the image was in front of the retina. The image is focused from the external view from the lens. It has come behind the retina. Therefore, it's a case of hypermetropia. Let's see the causes of it. This way we'll be asking what is the clinical condition, what are the causes of this condition, and what is the treatment mode. And this hypermetropia may come as a chart, it may come as a spotter, or it must come as a short note. The causes, the main cause is shortness of the diameter of the eyeball. The diameter of the eyeball may be short. The flattening, lens may be flattened, that is epidiameter is reduced. Lens and cornea also epidiameter is reduced. Refractive index of lenses has been changed. And the lens may be slightly posteriorly placed. And sometimes a crystalline lens may be altogether absent. Then eyeball may be too short, or lens may be too weak. Therefore, the focus is not proper, and the image is forming behind the retina. That the focusing power of the lens is too weak. And the eyeball is diameter too short. Therefore, the image is falling behind the retina, too short. Yeah, that is epidia of the eyeball is less. And coming to the treatment mode, we use a convex lens here. In case of myopia, we were using concave lens. And we can also use contact lens, and the surgery is also there. Surgical mode of correction is also there. And depending upon the age of the patient and the profession and the need of the patient, we choose the mode. Then it is called as a farsightedness. This is called hypermetropia is called as farsightedness, and myopia is called as short-sightedness. This far-sighted person, that is a hypermetropic person, can accommodate distant objects, and therefore can focus on the retina. The things which are far away are seen better by these people, but depending on severity, it is a severe case of hypermetropia, then distant vision may also be affected sometimes. Things are far seen, better seen when they are far off, then close. When depending on severity, the distant vision may also be blurred. It can occur at any age. And symptoms, because you are accommodating, abnormally you are accommodating, and you are trying to focus it on the retina, there will be a headache. The muscles of the eye will be straining. Extraocular muscles and all this will be straining. Eye strain will be there. Okay, and you feel like there's some stress on your eye, and the blurred vision in some instances. Squint can also be seen. And this is the next. Therefore, hypermetropia we have already done. The image falls behind the lens. And myopia, image falls before the lens. That is before the retina. That is hypermetropia. It falls behind the retina, and myopia falls before the retina. That is there. And this here, this picture will be kept for as a chart, and you have to identify the chart. And this is the pathway of hearing. This chart is a, this you see the cochlear semicircular canals, division of the eighth cranial nerve, cochlear nerve. Here, how they are entering into, just as they are entering, they are entering dorsal and ventral nuclei in the medulla. How the dorsal nuclei, this dorsal nuclei, most of the fibers are going to the opposite side, and the ventral nucleus fibers are going to the opposite side. Then alveolar nucleus, lateral lemniscus, then you have midbrain, and finally to the thalamus, to the auditory area, the auditory area. Here are the other pictures. This is the auditory nerve. Division of the eighth cranial nerve. Cochlea is arising from the hair cells of the cochlea, and then it is entering into the medulla. Here it is entering into the medulla. It is dividing into two parts, dorsal and ventral nuclei. Medulla, and here dorsal part. Some fibers are crossing to the opposite side, superior alveolar nucleus in the pons, and from there to the lateral nucleus of lateral lemniscus, and from there they are going to the inferior colliculus, and then the medial geniculate body, and from there to the primary auditory pathway. Other some fibers are also going contralaterally, also some fibers are going to the ipsilateral side. This is contralateral side, that is opposite side. Some fibers are going on the same side. Here dorsal fibers, some fibers are going on the same side, ipsilateral side, and some fibers are crossing to the contralateral side. Same. From here they are crossing near the trapezoid body. Medulla, near the trapezoid body, they are crossing to the opposite side. From there, superior alveolar nucleus of the midbrain, and then nuclei of the lateral lemniscus, inferior colliculus, medial geniculate body, and from there they go into the primary auditory area. Here 41 and 42. Here primary auditory area. This is the these things are called auditory pathway. You should be able to identify the pathway. You can identify with this semicircular canal and this cochlea, eighth cranial nerve division, and they are going to the primary auditory area. You will be given a figure like this without any names. Therefore, you have to identify this cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve, medulla, pons, midbrain, all these things you have to identify. And sometimes it might become artery path, may become as an essay also sometimes, and sometimes as a short notes also. Therefore, theoretically also it's a very important. And sometimes in Viva you may be asked to trace out the artery pathway. Yeah, let's see into the theory. Information travels from the receptors. What are the receptors in the organ of cortex? They are hair cells. There we have two rows of hair cells, and these hair cells, the ends of these hair cells, they carry, these are cochlear hair cells. They form the axons of the cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve, vestibular cochlear nerve. They form the axons of the cochlear division of the vestibular cochlear nerve. And from that, the information, as I've told, they are carried to the medulla, pons, midbrain, and from there to the primary auditory area in the cerebral cortex. Therefore, information is received from the organ of cortex, from the hair cells. The hair cells, action potential develops in the hair cells. And then inside the hair cells, they form the axons of the cochlear nerve. And from there, they go to the medulla, midbrain, pons, midbrain, and from there to the cerebral cortex, primary auditory area. This is the nutshell about the auditory pathway. This is known as primary auditory pathway. It's going to the hair cells from the cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve. It's arising from the hair cells. Two rows of hair cells are there in the cochlea. Therefore, these are traveling first to the medulla, then to the pons, then to the midbrain, and then finally to the cerebral cortex. Now coming to the little bit more details. Main components of auditory, there are two main components. One is the primary lemniscal pathway, which we have seen now. Lateral lemniscal pathway, the information is going from the to the lemniscal pathway. That is the main pathway. Just now we have seen that. Then we have got another pathway known as non-lemniscal pathway. This non-lemniscal pathway mediates unconscious perception such as attention, emotional response, and auditory reflexes. Non-lemniscal pathway mediates unconscious perception. So, but you have heard some sound. Unconsciously, you'll be turning your head to that side. Attention, some sound is coming from somewhere. You'll become a little bit more attention you'll pay. Suppose in the night time you hear some sound, you'll become more. They pay more attention, and you'll be focusing on to know the cause of the sound. Therefore, these are all carried by the non-lemniscal pathway. Emotional response, auditory reflex. All these things are these auditory reflexes. Now let's see the auditory pathway. Yeah, the auditory nerve. The information is coming from the hair cells, and the information the hair cells is going to the cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve and innervating the hair cells in the organ of cortex. That is, the hair cells innervating in the organ of cortex from the cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve. Their cell bodies are in the spiral ganglia. This is the first order neuron. The information is coming from the hair cells in the organ of cortex, and they are forming the axons of the eighth cranial nerve. The cell bodies are located in the spiral ganglia. This is the first order neuron. And from here, the nerve enters the cranium. The nerve is outside the cranium until now. The hair cells have sent some fibers, and these are formed into a eighth cranial nerve. There's cochlear division, and the cell bodies are located in spiral ganglia. From here, the first order neuron arises. The nerve enters the cranium. That is bone structure. That is through internal acoustic meters. Through internal acoustic meters, the nerve enters the cranium, and from there, here, the acoustic meters, then it enters into the brainstem. It enters into the brainstem. Here it joins with vestibular nerve. The cochlear nerve joins with the vestibular nerve while entering into the internal acoustic meter. The cochlear nerve has come singly from the hair cells. It has formed the cochlear division of the eighth cranial nerve. Spiral ganglion, the cell bodies are located. It has to enter the brain, cranium. Therefore, it is entering through internal acoustic meters. And while entering into the internal acoustic meters, it is joined with a vestibular nerve. And forms the vestibular cochlear nerve. And now what happens is, axons of these neurons relay in dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei of medulla oblongata. The axons they have entered into the midbrain. They have entered into the brainstem, and they have entered the medulla. Therefore, the axons of these neurons relay in the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei of the medulla. Here, the cochlear nerve, eighth cranial nerve, has entered into the medulla. Here we have got two nuclei, dorsal nuclei and ventral nuclei. They are split into two parts, dorsal nuclei and ventral nuclei. From here, the fibers, the dorsal nuclei, most of the fibers are crossing to the opposite side, and they are going to the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, and here and there to the inferior collicles. And some of the fibers for the dorsal lemniscus are also going directly. They are also going into the dorsally into the pons, and then from there it is going into the midbrain. Some fibers are going on the same side and some fibers are going outside. The ventral division fibers are also, some fibers are going to the opposite side, superior, some fibers are going to the same side. All these things here, they from inferior colliculus, they travel into the, all these fibers join together. From inferior colliculus go to the middle geniculate body, and from there to the primary artery cortex. Therefore, here, while entering into the air, it has been divided into two, dorsal part and ventral part. Yeah, this is what we have been discussing. Axons of these neurons rely in the dorsal and ventral cochlear nuclei. I've shown you dorsal and ventral cochlear. From ventral cochlear nuclei, most of the fibers they dissociate, that is, they go to the opposite side. They enter the superior auditory nucleus. They cross near the trapezoid body in the middle, and they go to the opposite contralateral, opposite superior auditory nuclei, the pons. And then some fibers also assigned to the contralateral lateral lemniscus. Some fibers go to the superior auditory nuclei, the palm, and fibers also assigned to the contralateral lateral lemniscus. Some fibers also synapse at the same side, ipsilateral, same side, to the superior alveolar nucleus, and lateral lemniscus. Yeah, superior alveolar nucleus, the pons. So some fibers are going to the opposite side and some fibers are going on the same side. Superior alveolar nucleus in the pons. Here's the nucleus of the lateral lemniscus. Yeah, ventral cochlear nuclei, they're going to the opposite side. Superior alveolar nucleus near the pons. And some fibers also ascending onto the lateral lemniscus. If you have to remember, they're crossing to the opposite side, ventral fibers going to the opposite side, decussation, that is they're crossing near the trapezoid body and going to the opposite side. The superior alveolar nucleus in the pons, they're crossing the trapezoid body, and they also ascend to the lateral lemniscus on the opposite side. Some fibers are also going to the ipsilateral, that is same side. And so same side superior nucleus of the pons and lateral lemniscus. Therefore, the fibers are going both same side and opposite side. Mostly opposite side for ventral cochlear nuclei. Now let's see what's happening to dorsal cochlear nuclei. From dorsal cochlear nuclei, what happens? These fibers project to the opposite side of the lateral lemniscus. Most fibers project to the opposite side of the lateral lemniscus to the contralateral nucleus of the lateral lemniscus, and others ascend to the same side. These fibers on superior alveolar nucleus also project to the nuclei of lateral lemniscus, whether it may be contralateral side or ipsilateral side. The fibers from superior alveolar nucleus may also project to the nuclei of lateral lemniscus. And then on these fibers, that is fibers ascending to lateral lemniscus, cochlear nucleus, superior alveolar nuclei, they all relate to the inferior colliculus in the midbrain. They go to the inferior colliculus in the midbrain, and then they go to the medial geniculate body of the thalamus in the same side. They go to the inferior colliculus of the midbrain. Yeah. They are going to the inferior colliculus of the midbrain. All these fibers have ascended till here. They have come till here. They are going to the inferior colliculus of the midbrain, and from there to the geniculate body, and from there to the primary artery cortex. infilla, then from there to the middle then flat body, and from here they go to the Brodmann's area 41-42 in the superior temporal gyrus under lateral picture. This is the primary auditory cortex. We are also having auditory association areas. They also receive inputs from primary auditory cortex and thalamus. These association areas, the areas which help in hearing, they also receive inputs from, the signals are received from primary auditory cortex and thalamus. The main auditory pathway, as it goes up to the cerebral cortex along its route, it interacts with pathways conveying the sensory inputs in the brain. So many pathways are ascending upwards. Therefore, it sends a few fibers to these pathways also. The sensory inputs are there. That the spinal thalamic tract, posterior spinal thalamic tract, all these things are there. Also spinal thalamic tract. All these things are, but as they are ascending, they may send a few fibers here and there to these tracts. Therefore, a little bit of information is also conveyed to the sensory inputs, that is the ascending tracts. Now, this is the lemniscal pathway. Now, coming to the non-lemniscal pathway, they don't lead to primary auditory cortex. They do not end in primary auditory cortex. They involve multisensory integration reflexes. As I told you, the pathway doesn't lead to cerebral cortex, main areas such as part 1, part 2. They involve multisensory. As I told you, alertness. If you hear a sound or something, you become suddenly alert. That is multisensory integration reflexes. If you hear some sound, you just want to find out what is the source of it and all this thing. You become alert. This is a multisensory integration reflexes, attention plane, and emotional response. Applied aspects. This suppose it is there's a supranuclear lesion. That is above the level of cochlear nucleus. This does not lead to serious hearing impairment. It is a supranuclear lesion that is above the level of cochlear nucleus. This do not lead to serious hearing impairment. Hearing problems can be conductive or sensorineural, but rarely central, because the presentation is there from both sides. And with that we finish the auditory pathway. Now here we have to identify this picture. This picture is of a retinal layers. We have altogether 10 layers in the retina. The layers are outer limiting layer, layer of knots and cones, inner limiting layer, outer nuclear layer, outer plexiform layer. There's the inner nuclear layer, inner plexiform layer, layer of ganglionic cells, and we have got this layer, inner limiting layer. All these things are there. Altogether 10 layers. Let's see one by one. First layer is the layer of pigment layer. It consists of melanin pigment. It is a single layer. Layer of rods and cones. External limiting layer. Outer nuclear layer. Outer plexiform layer. Inner nuclear layer. Inner plexiform layer. Layer of ganglionic cells. Nerve fiber layer. Internal limiting nerve fiber layer. Internal limiting layer. Altogether 10. The main layer is layer of rods and cones. These are receptors of vision. Layer of rods and cones, receptors of vision. The light travels and then the receptors are excited, stimulated. And from here, the receptors, the signals are sent to the outer plexiform layer. The signals are sent to the outer plexiform layer. In the outer plexiform layer, we have got the ganglionic cells, we have got these basal cells and horizontal cells. The basal cells transmit information in a vertical direction, and the horizontal cells, they transmit side to side information. That is, to the adjacent cells, they transmit information. Therefore, when light receptors of this vision, rods and cones are excited, the information reaches into the outer plexiform layer, where this basal and horizontal cells are excited, and this in turn excites inner plexiform layer. Inner plexiform layer, we have got the granular cells and amacrine cells. Amacrine cells are interneurons. They transmit signals ganglion cells and they form presynaptic and postsynaptic connections. Amacrine cells are mostly interneurons. The signals are transmitted to the ganglion cells, the amacrine cells, and also from directly. And but here, the ganglion cells, they form the nerve fibers of optic nerve, and then the optic nerve fibers are formed. Let's see in detail. Yeah, pigment layer consists of pigment melanin. Pigment layer is single layer and consists of pigment melanin. And it is second layer, which is important. It is a layer of photoreceptors of rods and cones. That is the second layer. Outer nuclear layer, it contains the cell bodies of rods and cones. And inner nuclear layer contains cell bodies and nuclei of bipolar and amacrine and horizontal cells. The outer nuclear layer contains cell bodies of rods and cones. Inner nuclear layer is containing cell bodies of bipolar, amacrine, and horizontal cells. Interspersed, that is in between these nuclear layers, in between these cell bodies and all these things, the neural elements are known as glial cells are present. They are also called Muller cells. They have a nutritive function. In between the neural elements, there are cells known as glial cells. The name is Muller cells. They are helping nutrition. They provide nutrition to these cells. The ganglionic layer, this layer contains ganglionic cells. Which I have already told you, the fibers of this they are form the axons of these ganglionic cells form optic nerve, and the information will travels to the brain, occipital cortex, area number 17, primary visual area. The ganglionic cells, the fibers of these ganglionic cells, they carry visual information. The fibers, they consist of axons. Axons of these ganglionic cells, they form optic nerve. Optic nerve carries information to brain. Area number 17, primary visual area. 18 and 19, associated visual areas. These ganglionic cell fibers are unmyelinated in the retina. They are not myelinated in the retina. But when it forms an optic nerve, it gets myelinated. And then the retina, they are not myelinated. But when they form an optic nerve, they get myelinated. Yeah, a little bit more details I'm talking about these photoreceptors, rods and cones. Just now we have discussed, they transmit the signals to the outer plexiform layer. First layer is the pigment layer, outer limiting layer, and rods and cones layer, outer limiting layer, outer nuclear layer. Then comes the outer plexiform layer. Then they transmit signals to the outer plexiform layer. And here in this outer plexiform layer, we have got two types of cells: this bipolar cells and horizontal cells. We have got two types of cells: bipolar cells and horizontal cells. The horizontal cells mainly transmit signals in a horizontal direction, that is to the adjacent cells. The signals they are received from rods and cones, they are transmitted in a horizontal manner in the outer plexiform layer, that is to the adjacent cell structures in the outer plexiform layer. And they also transmit, bipolar cells are already there, and they also transmit the signals to the bipolar cells. Therefore, outer plexiform layer consists two types of cells: bipolar cells, which transmit signals vertically, and horizontal cells, which transmit signals in a horizontal cell to the adjacent cells. They also transmit signals to the bipolar cells. Yeah, the bipolar cells, they transmit vertically. In this direction. The signals they receive, they transmit in a vertical direction, and horizontal cells in a horizontal direction, and also to the adjacent cells they transmit the signals. That is whatever stimulation they have received, they transmit. And from here, the signals go to the inner plexiform layer. From outer plexiform layer, the signals are arriving into the inner plexiform layer. Here, there are two types of cells: the ganglion cells and the amacrine cells. The amacrine cells are interneuronal cells. Ganglion cells and amacrine cells. Ganglion amacrine cells are interneuron cells. Both the ganglion cells and amacrine cells, they are both concerned with presynaptic and postsynaptic connections. And the axons of ganglionic cells, as I've already told, they form the optic nerve fibers. This ganglion, finally, the signals have arrived in the ganglionic cells. They transmit output signals to the optic nerve in the brain. For this, I hope you have understood. The first, the signals are received in the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors are rods and cones. The photoreceptors, outer plexiform layer is stimulated. Outer plexiform layer consists of basal cells and horizontal cells. In the basal cells, they receive the stimulus in a vertical manner, they transmit horizontal cells in a horizontal manner to the adjacent cell. From here, the signals go to the inner plexiform layer. And here, the ganglion cells are there, and amacrine cells are there. Amacrine cells are interneurons. And the ganglion cells, they form fibers of the axons of these ganglion cells. They form the optic nerve. And the signals are transmitted from the optic nerve to the brain. And 6 types of neuronal cells in the retina are also present in the interplexiform cells, but this is not very important. Here the signals are inhibitory. The signals in the neuron, 6 types of cells, they are inhibitory, and they control the lateral spread of visual signals. As I have already told you, the horizontal cells spread signals laterally in the outer plexiform layer. Therefore, it inhibits the controls. It doesn't allow more of the signals to go laterally. That is, it inhibits the lateral spread of visual signals. Now, next slide. This abnormalities of the visual pathway. Abnormalities of the visual pathway. This is the chart will be. Retinal layers is also an essay question. It can be a short essay. Retinal layers can be a short essay. But we have to discuss about all the layers. Pathway of hearing is also a short essay. Therefore, I am dealing in a little bit more detailed manner. Just I am not mentioning the clinical charts and leaving. A little bit more detailed manner I am dealing with because it will be helpful for you in the exams. Even if you get a short questions, that is short answer questions, or whether it is a short bit questions, or whether it is a chart or anything, you should be able to answer because these are important both theoretically and also practically. Therefore, retina is also all 10 layers you have to discuss. Discuss layers of retina can be there. The question based on that can be there. And if there's a chart, whatever questions are asked, you should identify the chart, and whatever questions are asked, you have to reply. Therefore, these are both important theoretically and practically. Therefore, I am discussing in a more detailed manner. If it was simply a chart, we need not discuss in such a detailed manner because already it has been covered in the theory class. Therefore, we need not discuss, but because it will be a sort of revision for you, since exams are fast approaching, discussing in a detailed manner. Therefore, it will be useful for you for theory exams also. Therefore, the next chart is this: the definition of the visual pathway. And this is the visual pathway. Let's see the defect. The first defect is a complete blindness. Complete blindness. Here the optic nerve is stuck here. This is optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic radiation, optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, optic radius. This optic nerve, suppose the left optic nerve is cut completely. It is a detached in the visual path. That's a total blindness in the left eye. Suppose here in the optic chiasma, the lesion is there in the optic chiasma. We are getting a bitemporal hemianopia. Both temporal side vision is lost. Here, bitemporal. Why? See this temporal fibers are crossing from the left side and the right side. The temporal fibers are crossing here in the optic chiasma, whereas the nasal fibers are going without crossing. They are passing. Therefore, when there is a lesion in the center region, we get a bitemporal hemianopia. Hemi means half of the eye lost. Anopia means blindness. Since both the temporal regions have been lost, we call it as bitemporal hemianopia. See, here it is the temporal vision because if the cut is in the center, suppose the cut is here, we will get a nasal loss of vision. If both sides are cut here by nasal hemianopia, but if only one side is cut, we get the on that side the vision will be lost. Therefore, here bitemporal hemianopia is more common. This is bitemporal hemianopia. And coming to this optic tract is cut. Here, optic tract is cut. Then what's happening? Here we have got this temporal fibers. Here, temporal fibers are lost from this right eye, and nasal fibers are lost from the left eye. Here, see clearly picture. Here, medially temporal fibers are lost from the right eye. And here, nasal fibers are lost from the left eye. Therefore, we are getting this sort of picture. Nasal left eye, temporal, homonymous, hemianopia. Homonymous means same side, both same side. This side, right side, this side is also same. Homonymous, same side, hemi, half, anopia, blindness. Homonymous, same side, hemi, half, anopia, blindness. Homonymous hemianopia. It's complete blindness, bitemporal hemianopia, homonymous hemianopia. And when the cut is here, optic radiation. Homonymous hemianopia with macula sparing. That is here, macula vision is spared. The central macula vision is spared. Here, representation of macula vision is more than peripheral vision. The macula vision representation is more than peripheral representation. Therefore, here what happens? The macula vision is spared. Therefore, this is very easy. If you get this chart, it's very easy. It's a complete cut, blindness. And suppose it's cut here, you follow this picture. You will easily understand. Bitemporal hemianopia, homonymous hemianopia. Homonymous hemianopia, okay? There's nothing much difficulty about this. Here, optic nerve, optic chiasma, optic tract, optic radiation. Here lesions are whatever I told you, the same lesions are here. Complete blindness, bitemporal hemianopia, homonymous hemianopia, homonymous hemianopia with macula sparing. In the exams, you will be given only the names will not be there. You will be given only a chart. And here, just for discussion, we have displayed the names. And this can also come as a short answer question. This can also come as a short answer question. Therefore, you have to read thoroughly. Now, let's discuss a little about visual pathway. The fibers on each side crossing in the near the optic chiasma. Nasal half of each retinal fibers are crossing to the opposite side in the center optic chiasma. Just now we have seen. The nasal half fibers are crossing. Fibers in the temporal half of each retina remaining in the same side. And the fibers from the nasal half dissect and optic tract is formed. optic tract. From the optic tract, the fibers go to the pretectum of midbrain, and from there, Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and from there, lateral geniculate body, then optic radiation, then internal capsule, then primary visual area number 70. Optic tract, pretectum of midbrain, Edinger-Westphal nucleus, lateral geniculate body, optic radiation, primary visual area number 70. Homonymous defect. Defect on same side of both visual fields. Homonymous means same side of both fields. ME means hetero means defect in the opposite sides of one side may be right and one side may be left field of vision defect. Therefore, that's called as heteronomous. Complete blindness is the vision is on the vision of optic nerve. If it is cut completely on one side, it causes complete. Homonymous. Homonymous, suppose the lesion on the right side of optic nerve. It produces left homonymous adenopia. And lesion of left optic nerve produces right homonymous hemianopia. Bitemporal is common, binasal is rare. This regarding macula sparing. Lesion in the optic optic radiation. They cause this homonymous adenopia with macula sparing. The macula vision is spared. Lesions in the genico-calcarean tract cause this defect. Loss of peripheral vision with intact macula vision. Macula sparing means loss of peripheral vision with intact macula vision. Intact macula vision. That is macula sparing. As we have already discussed, this is because the macular representation is separate from that of peripheral field representation. The macular representation area is separate from the peripheral field representation, and the area of representation is also large when compared to peripheral. It is the area of representation of visual fields in the cerebral cortex area. In the occipital cortex, the visual field areas are there. Therefore, the area of representation of peripheral field is less when compared to macular representation. Hence, macular representation is not easily damaged. First, peripheral vision goes. Therefore, if macular vision also has to be affected, the lesion must extend to a vast area, to an extensive area in the occipital cortex. Occipital cortex, primary artery area is 17, 18 and 19 associated areas. The macular vision has to go, lesion has to be more large area, the lesion should occupy a large area. Because representation is more, the area of representation is more, and unless that area is occupied by the lesions, it will not be affected. Therefore, we get macular sparing. Now, this is another. This is another picture will be given. Identify the picture. What is the cause? Identify the picture. What are the cause? What are the changes seen on the ipsilateral, that is same side? What are the changes on the contralateral opposite side? Lesion is here. This is a case of spinal cord lesion, Brown-Sequard syndrome. The lesion is here. The lesion is here. The injury may be due to trauma or compression of extramedullary mass. This is a rare clinical condition. This injury may be due to trauma or compression of some extramedullary mass may be there. It may be compressing the spinal cord. Therefore, medullary mass, spinal cord has been compressed. The injury may be due to this. Then, what is Brown-Sequard syndrome? If the injury is spinal cord, If the spinal cord is transacted entirely, all motor functions listed to the segments are lost. All sensations, motor and sensory listed to segments are lost. But if the spinal cord is transacted only on one, that is, the section is only on one side, right side or left side, then only brown, only half area is gone. That is, spinal cord is transacted only on one side. Then Brown-Sequard syndrome occurs. If the spinal cord is transacted entirely, all sensations, motors, and everything will be going. But if the spinal cord is transacted on only one side, Brown-Sequard syndrome will occur. Here, the transaction is only on the left side of the patient. Transaction is only on the one side. Therefore, this is a case of Brown-Sequard syndrome. It is not a case of complete transaction of the spinal cord. It's a case of a partial transaction, that is only hemisectional spinal cord. And this we call it as a Brown-Sequard syndrome. Now, as you all know, the anterior and lateral spinothalamic does cross to the opposite side, and the dorsal column does travel on the same side. Therefore, what happens? Let's say, suppose a lesion is there here. Yeah, suppose in the site of lesion, what happens? Total loss of all sensation occurs. And then there may be a paralysis. But pain and temperature sensation, they are carried by lateral, anterior lateral spinothalamic tract. Therefore, pain temperature sensations, pain and temperature sensations are lost on the opposite side because they are crossing to the opposite side, and these are lost on the opposite side. On the same side, loss of touch, 2-point discrimination, vibration sense, proprioceptive, and spastic paralysis is seen. Therefore, on the same side, the fibers of dorsal column fibers do not cross. Therefore, these sensations are lost on this side. On the opposite side, pain and temperature sensations are lost, and impact and touch sensations. Spinal cord only one side is Brown-Sequard syndrome, and all motor functions are blocked on the side of lesion, below the level of lesion. But regarding sensory sensation, some of them are retained and some of them are lost on the opposite side, some of them are lost on the same side. Pain, heat, cold are lost on the opposite side. Damage due to lateral spinothalamic tract. Anterolateral spinothalamic tract, because they cross to the immediately, they cross to the, they arrive from the dorsal root ganglion, they cross to the enter this side and spinal cord sections, and they cross to the opposite side. Answer, these are lost. Root touch is poorly localized because of there's a partial transmission in the opposite side. Therefore, root touch is poorly localized. So some sensations are still there because only partial transmission occurs to the opposite side, and some sensations are retained on the same side. That sensation transmitted by the dorsal lateral column, kinesthetic, position sense, vibration, localization, 2-point discrimination are lost on the side of them because they are not crossing, they are going on the same side. This will discuss in the next class. Thank you. Student